Hey everyone, it's World Review with Ivo Daalder, our weekly show to look at all the big stories from around the world. And what a week it has been for peace and maybe for war. We're going to look at the Nobel Peace Prize. We're going to look at what's happening in the Middle East and particularly the ceasefire that is now in effect. And we're going to take a look at what's happening in Venezuela. Nobody better to do that with than Nahal Toosi of Politico. She's the senior foreign affairs correspondent there and writes a fantastic column called Compass, and Prashant Rao, who is now senior editor at Semaphore, but has reported from all over the world, including the Middle East. So, Prashant, let's start with you. A really, really big day here on October 10, the beginnings of what looks like not a temporary, but a very real ceasefire after 2 years of war. What do you make of it, and how did we get here?
I mean, Ivo, for all of us, who observe this part of the world, who've covered it, who've reported from it, it's. I think reflexively, we are built to be cynical about sort of attempts at progress there. But this is, you have to be hopeful on a day like this because the ceasefire in Gaza has taken effect officially. Israeli forces are going to withdraw to pre-agreed upon lines. Israeli hostages who have been held for more than 2 years are about to be returned to their families, and Palestinian prisoners will be freed. There's a whole, humanitarian aid will finally be allowed into Gaza in sort of massive amounts. It's easy in some ways to lose track of how much has changed in the region as a result of this war. Obviously, there's a huge humanitarian catastrophe underway in Gaza. 67,000 people dead. The UN has said that famine is taking roots in parts of Gaza City. But then if you look at the sort of wider region, in the past 2 years, Hezbollah has been defenestrated. Iran is a shell of the threat it used to pose. The relations between the Gulf states and Israel, which seem to be going on a sort of relentlessly upward trajectory, now seem to be fraying. The entire shape of how the Middle East operates, to say nothing of what happened in Syria, which is not directly relevant and not directly caused by this, but has certainly some fallout. Is just remarkable. It's hard to sort of keep it all together in our heads at one time. But one of the things that is kind of striking is I do think, President Trump, who comes in for a lot of criticism about his sort of diplomatic style, deserves a huge amount of credit here. It seems to me certainly that, just the way he sort of largely pushed the Israeli prime minister into this deal, forcing him to apologize to the Qataris over the strike in Doha, and sort of pushing him to the table, it has to be acknowledged after months of largely, seeming to allow this humanitarian catastrophe to unfold, is remarkable. And I think it's, it's always cautious to be optimistic in the Middle East, but I feel like today is a day where we can sort of be cautiously optimistic.
And it strikes me that's exactly right. Particularly after all the pessimism after 2 years and all the destruction and all the death on both sides, because it of course started on October 7th with the Hamas attack on Israel. Nahal, we are here. Trump campaigned and has often said that he is the only one who can do this. We now have a control case. Joe Biden tried to do it for 18 months. And Donald Trump, I don't think he's been trying hard for 8 months, but he's been in one form or another, been engaged in trying to get this done. And he seems to be able to have gotten it done, not just a ceasefire for temporary, but an end to the war. Is that fair? And if so, how did he do it?
Look, a couple of thoughts. I've been talking to some Biden officials, and they're very happy that this is happening. They're a bit frustrated that it took this long. Part of the frustration is that Trump didn't do anything for so many months. He was hands off. He allowed the humanitarian situation in Gaza to get so much worse. And then, I think from my understanding of everything I've read, of people I've talked to, the Israeli strike in Qatar gave Trump and the people around him like an opportunity. Like they were just like, okay, the Arab states are all really mad. They're speaking with one voice. We have the moment to put pressure on Netanyahu. And I think Trump was genuinely kind of annoyed. with what Netanyahu did. And so this kind of came together in a way, and the timing works. And so one of the other things, though, that when I talk to Biden administration officials and my own kind of thoughts on this stuff is, look, a lot of ideas can be really good ideas, but you have to have the right timing, right? And so you always have to put the context of what people do in the time frame and what was happening, and that's really, really important. And then when I asked some Biden officials, I was like, well, you guys, are you jealous that Trump is getting this credit? Their reaction was, it's not jealousy, but it's more like, the word is, I guess, frustration or annoyance, because they're like, he is usually, in their opinion, so bad on so many things most of the time that when he does something that is a good thing that ain't like normal presidents would get only normal levels of credit for, he gets way high levels of credit for it. So there's this frustration on their end where it's like, man, this guy is just this unique person who gets a lot of credit for stuff that we would barely get hardly any credit to do. And, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, former Secretary of State, he has even said that the plan that Trump is implementing is basically the same plan that the Biden team left him. We're talking about the 20-point plan. So there are these like mixed emotions. But again, Trump and his people, including Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and others, took advantage of the moment, the timing, the context. And this has come through. One last thought, though. We don't really, really know what truly happened in Gaza these past 2 years. I really hope that the international press gets access to Gaza and we start to rebuild, like, or understand, do the more depth type of reporting to find out the full true story of everything that happened. Because I think the numbers and other things are probably quite different than we realize.
Yeah, really, really, really important point. I mean, yes, there has been extraordinary reporting by Gazan journalists. 150 or more have been killed, some targeted almost directly. But they worked under extraordinary circumstances. For one, it's a warlike circumstance, and for the other, they just didn't have the capacity to probe in the way that hopefully journalists will now be able to do. Prashant, just okay. So it looks like phase one, which is an important phase. It is what matters to the people in Gaza and to the people in Israel. The hostages coming home, the war ending. It's really, really important. But as we found out throughout history, and stopping the fighting and having peace are two very, very different things. And that's particularly true in the Middle East, where in one form or another, the conflict has been there since 1947, since the Declaration of Independence by Israel in 1948. You were cautiously optimistic about the ceasefire sticking, which is, in and of itself a big deal. But what are you going to look for now? What are the indicators that we're going to move this into in a fundamentally different way than it has for decades, where it has been stuck as an issue?
I think one of the difficulties with what you said is all of the long-term indicators do not bode well, as far as I'm concerned. If we are cautiously optimistic about sort of phase one, I find it hard to see much sort of long-term prospect for a real sort of, as I say, long-term, in the next sort of year or two of this really sticking, because obviously the region has changed as we discussed, right? So the circumstances are different and the context is different, but the politics in Israel have shifted radically in the last 2 years, to say nothing of the sort of prior period in which, the votes against sort of the deal were from far-right members of Netanyahu's cabinet who are holding up his government. And so, as this sort of deal progresses, you can see that there will be genuine opposition domestically within Israel. Polling increasingly indicates that both Palestinians and Israelis have turned against a two-state solution more broadly. And so the domestic sort of belief in that idea that used to undergird it, even in times of sort of when Israeli leaders were opposed to it, seems to have ebbed away. And there's also this idea that, this fact that while Hamas has been largely destroyed as a active entity, as we all know from our careers in diplomacy and in journalism, groups such as Hamas do not go away. And if that is the bar by which, the hardline Israeli kind of leaders will require, I suspect that will not be met, and cannot really ever be met, because that is just simply how an idea proliferates. It stays in the ether, and so the notion that, as the sort of broader second phase, sort of the further phases call for, the kind of elimination of, the sort of end of Hamas, the sort of disarming of Hamas. We know from Northern Ireland that actually it is extraordinarily hard to disarm and sort of a militant group that is well armed, and has largely undergirded the civil apparatus of an entire territory. So again, we spent the first 5 minutes being optimistic. Now back to normal for me, at least. It just feels like a lot of the long term trends are worrying.
I mean, well, both. How do you see it? And I think importantly, I mean, Netanyahu said today that the ceasefire is being implemented, the hostages going home, but the goal of disarming and getting rid of Hamas remains, and then we can do it the easy way or the hard way, which has become his new sort of mantra here. Donald Trump is the one who has convinced Netanyahu, there's no doubt in my mind, for doing it this way, his way. Rather than the way that Netanyahu wanted to do, which was a continuation of the war. Is he going to be able to? Is Donald Trump going to be able to maintain the push, the presence, the constant vigilance to make sure that Netanyahu doesn't walk away from this process that has started? How do you see it?
This is the big question. Trump is not known for his patience, his attention span, or his attention to detail. Right. And so this is where, but look, in this type of thing, delegation is not necessarily a bad thing. Right. Having people like I mean, Kushner, I think a lot of people hope that he will stay heavily involved. But there's also a serious lack of capacity right now. Look, implementing a lot of this stuff, like, who is going to count as an independent monitor? How are you going to create this international stabilization force? These types of things. It requires actual experts, many of whom have been fired from the State Department. The organization that might have done some of the development and rebuilding of Gaza, USAID, is not around anymore. And by the way, the government is on shutdown, so it's like that type of capacity, the destruction or dismantling of so large parts of the U.S. bureaucracy, could seriously undermine efforts to implement much of this deal over time, and that basically means a lessening of pressure from Netanyahu, who over time does tend to find a way to get used to work his way around American pressure, and I think that's those are some of the key things. This is the type of deal that it's going to take years and years to fully implement. It'll outlast the Trump administration. So can you actually pull it together? And I think the international community can also play a big part in this. I know Europeans want to be part of this board of peace that Trump is putting together. And one last thing I will also I want to definitely mention on this front. Israel has a lot of rebuilding to do in terms of its standing on the global stage, right? So much of the world is furious with how it has handled Gaza. Can Israel rebuild its diplomatic ties, its just reputational standing? That's a big one to also watch.
Yeah, a lot of things, and I think you're smart, Nahal, to talk about the capacity. Kushner and others are doing interviews all over the place, including the New York Times, saying, we deal makers do this differently. But deal makers go to the point where the money gets exchanged and the title gets exchanged. Diplomatic deal making, that's the beginning of the process. That's not the end. And particularly something as complicated as this, which is infested with deep historical significance, and then the level of destruction is going to be really hard. Prashant?
Yeah, just to build on what Nahal pointed out, quite aside from the U.S. Being hollowed out in its sort of diplomatic capacity, we have to also remember that UNRWA has been hollowed out. A bunch of aid workers have not gotten visas in a long time. There's just a lot of boring is a pejorative word, but really patient stuff that needs to be done, administrative stuff that needs to be done to rebuild the capacity of making Gaza not a humanitarian disaster zone anymore. It won't just be that, you let aid in and everything will be okay. To say nothing of the psychological impact of having gone through a famine, right? Alex DeWall writes about this very poignantly, is that uh, famine sort of exists through populations for generations. It's not a sort of moment in time. It's a thing that sort of takes hold in the sort of in the heart and in the populace. And we have to be cognizant of that too, I think.
A lot of big things going forward to watch out, but nothing detracts from the reality that today the guns stopped. The people in the south are marching in large numbers to the north to go visit back into Gaza City. Some of them not been there for a year or 2 years to see if their houses are still standing up. Aid will start to move. Hostages will come home. That's a big deal. It's in some ways a deal worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize, which is what the president, of course, has wanted. He didn't get it. Nahal, and it's a good segue to our second story, Venezuela, because of course Maria Machado, who was the opposition leader, banned from running in the election, but really single-handedly helped Mr. Was it Ernesto Gonzalez win the presidency? It's not Ernesto Gonzalez.
Edmundo Gonzalez.
Okay, so I got the initial right. Won the presidency, which according to the Carter Center, that he won 70% of the vote. Venezuela is back in some ways in our news, and not because anything is happening in Venezuela, but a lot seems to be happening in the Oval Office. And in the fifth on the fifth floor in the outer ring of the Pentagon, or it is now called the Department of War. Nahal, you've been digging into this to sort of kind of find out what's going on. Are we going to war? Are we getting rid of this pretty horrendous dictator, by the way, Mr. Maduro, and installing a new regime there, or is this all something else?
So I'm basically giving a little preview of my coming Compass column.
This is what we do, right? We steal your thunder.
But look, here's the thing. First of all, I don't know if the Nobel Peace Prize Committee is like thinking this, Machiavellianly, but like to give it to Maria Corina Machado right now is incredible because she is trying to overthrow Maduro, and she has done incredible work as an opposition leader in Venezuela. I mean, that her stuff has been really remarkable. But it's hard for Trump to be mad at her because he is effectively trying to help her overthrow Maduro, right? So what are you going to do? Be mad at this woman you're helping to try to... So I that must have been very interesting for Trump to take in when he found out that she won the prize. Now, look, is it regime change? Not officially. It's more that the administration is saying, look, we think we can put enough pressure on Maduro using this idea that he is actually not a real head of state. He's a head of a criminal enterprise, right? He's a drug kingpin. So they're casting Nicolas Maduro as a criminal drug lord. And because the administration is very much amping up its war on the cartels in this hemisphere, going after the militarily, striking boats, teaming up with the Mexicans unofficially, that sort of thing, they say, look, Maduro's empire is a legitimate target, and we're going to go after him in many ways. That, to my knowledge, there's no order to take out Maduro. There's no order to detain him just yet from Trump. But they're not ruling that out because, as one person was telling me, I mean, don't we go after, drug kingpins and terrorists all the time? Don't we take them out all the time? And that's the other thing. They've designated these drug organizations as terrorist organizations, which means they also see Maduro as a terrorist and a legitimate target in that way. So if regime change happens to happen because for whatever reason this anti-cartel campaign takes, pressures Maduro's people around him to get rid of him, or for whatever reasons brings him down, and if Trump could escalate further and actually say, go get Maduro himself, then wow, what a nice, happy coincidence, right? There's not going to be any tears shed at the White House. And the upside of doing it this way, one of the upsides of doing it this way, is that you're not officially going in as like an invader that overthrows the regime. So you're not really responsible for the country afterward, right? And you can also sell it to your MAGA base. The MAGA base doesn't want the U.S. to be invading other countries, right? But they are pretty supportive of fighting the cartels. So this is kind of how it's going.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating, and Prashant, I just have echoes of 1989, and remember 1989, George H.W. Bush, vice president, becomes president. Manuel Noriega in Panama is indicted as a drug lord, and we just go in, we arrest him. And then we leave. A pretty remarkable thing, and so. As people in South America look at this, they've been here before. Yankee imperialism is very real for a lot of people. How do you think that people in Latin America, but generally South America in particular, are looking at this? And are they sort of, they don't like Maduro either, or a whole bunch of them don't like Maduro either. But, in Colombia and Brazil, where you have more lefty leaders, although democratically elected, very, very different. Let me stress that than Maduro. In Mexico, these are the kinds of fears one has about the United States that haven't been around for a while, but they're back, right?
They're back, but it's sort of, in some ways, it also illustrates so many of the tensions sort of that Latin American countries are grappling with. One of which is, they're all seeing, well, several of them are seeing really significant upsurges in violence that are sort of astonishing. Ecuador, is now like sort of seeing one of the highest murder rates in the world. Formerly peaceful country.
I thought that was Chicago. Which is where I am, and I don't see.
So going to one or the other. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Are you okay, Ivo? Are you safe?
Yeah, I'm safe. I'm okay. I'm in the 19th floor, so it's okay.
They're going to be rappelling up soon. But the other thing that is really interesting about this is it is a kind of really, and I'm sure Nahal's piece I'm really looking forward to reading it, but it really kind of gets into the question of where does America see its strength and its power emanating from in the modern era? Because more and more, this kind of extension, this idea that, the U.S. will use force to enact change, while, the MAGA base obviously is anti-drug cartels and, but doesn't want to see America get sort of drawn into conflicts abroad. There is also a sense that the U.S. just shouldn't use force abroad. And that's kind of, it feels like it's been one of those things that they've talked about and has largely been where Trump has tripped up with his base to some degree or another. And I'm just kind of fascinated by, the kind of dichotomy of this argument that the U.S. military is weak, it's woke, it's not able to do these things, but then using it to effectively overthrow another regime or attempt to de facto is kind of fascinating to me. It sort of says so much about the kind of the tension that sits at the core of what American diplomacy and military might is today.
I mean, and related to that, which is actually where I thought you were going, although I think the MAGA point is a very, very important one, and this question of to what extent does the American public, or at least the supporters of Donald Trump, still support an internationalist foreign policy, including a militarized internationalist foreign policy. The related to this is this question of, how are we exerting influence? It used to be that we did it through a combination of what's called hard and soft power. We've, as Nahal has reported, but also mentioned just now, we've eliminated our soft power resources within the international sphere by getting rid of USAID through immigration, deportations, etc. And there is this question: if you get rid of every tool to address foreign problems, then every problem looks like a nail because all you have is a hammer.
Look, this is the thing. I was thinking last night, I was like, if I were to ever write a book about what's happening now, I would probably title it like The Age of Incoherence, right? And I feel like that is what Trump's overall approach to so many things is. Just look at the cartel fight for a second, okay? We're militarizing it. We're cracking down. We're going after the cartels. At the same time, this administration is cutting funding for drug treatment programs. Okay. At the same time, it's deporting a bunch of migrants who are basically going to be jobless, many of them jobless young men who are going back, who are probably going to be more susceptible to working for the cartels. At the same time, we're not doing anything. In fact, we're trying to gut gun control laws, which help the cartels. At the same time, we're doing the tariffs, which are going to weaken the economies of these Latin American countries, which it helps the cartels because they know how to operate in the black market. I mean, so it's like if you want to fight drug trafficking, you can't just do it on one front. You have to look at a bunch of other stuff, have a comprehensive strategy in which one thing doesn't undermine the other. But on so many things in this administration's foreign policy, they do not have this overall strategic approach that is coherent and works together. And that is, I mean, like I said, it's incoherent.
So I think that's right. By the way, great, not only great book, but great column.
I already wrote that one.
Oh yeah, okay. No, you're all right. There you go. So go look at we are a free advertisement. By the way, Semaphore is great too. You should get their newsletters. Just want to make that sure that we get that in. I think you're right. I think there is a strategy, and let me propose this and see what you both think. I think the strategy is defense of the homeland. And it is, and the two biggest threats that we see that this administration sees to the homeland is drugs and immigration. And so that if you destroy the drug lords, particularly the ones that are coming, easily destroyed by drones flying overhead in big fast boats, little fast boats actually, and you deport immigration, you've solved your problem. And I think that is the strategy. And the rest of the world, that doesn't matter, is all about how do you strengthen your capacity at home to defend yourself at home. I mean, I was struck by the Hexeth speech to not just about, by the way, somebody called him, I think it was Elliot Cohen, Tom Nichols called Hexeth the Secretary of PT, which I thought was great. He said, what we're going to do is we're going to defend the southern borders and we're going to defend the cities. There's this sense that this is what we are about. We're back to a very isolationist perspective of defending ourselves by dominating the hemisphere. Prashant, does that ring right, or you see different?
I think that does sound right, actually, because if you fit it, if you sort of test it against other kind of PCs, right, is this idea of like onshoring manufacturing, because sort of international, sort of globally fast-moving supply chains are a vulnerability, not a strength of American kind of companies. Sort of charging tariffs on films that come into the country, effectively tariffing ideas is kind of gets at that idea as well. Things that come from abroad are the threat, right? That is like actually, and you could agree or disagree with the policy, but at least there, to some degree, maybe there is some coherence to that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And the other thing that is kind of, I think, worthwhile making with that point is, talking to somebody who talks to a lot of European diplomats recently, was asked him, what does Europe get most wrong about what's happening in the United States right now? And his remark was, Europe believes that this will end in 2028. And then we'll be back to business as usual. And actually, Europe does not fully grasp that there is a deeper thing that has happened here that goes far beyond the president. Whether it's Biden did not reduce tariffs, and not to say that like a Democratic administration would be this have this policy on immigration or whatever, but there is a deeper movement here that extends beyond the president and has some measure of sympathy on some policies on the left as well. And so I think, to your point, there is like a reason for this. There is a political movement that undergirds it beyond, what seems to be, at first glance at least, the kind of somewhat sort of schizophrenic policies of one man.
Now, how do you see that? In terms of, you think there is the beginnings of a coherent strategy, which would, of course, mean you have to have a new title for your book. But
look, I think we're, without giving too much away, I think that when the national security strategy comes out, which isn't too far away. It's going to be a really interesting window into the president's thinking, not simply like what a bunch of bureaucrats think that the U.S. should and will do. I think instead this document is going to reflect how the president actually sees the world. And look, this can be a good thing or a bad thing. It can be good because it's a more honest way to know how to predict what a country will do, because if Trump sees the world in a particular way, then you have a better sense of what's going to happen. At the same time, it can really show some glaring deficiencies in the U.S. national security strategy. So everyone, ally, adversary, whoever, is going to be watching the unveiling of the strategy and reading it pretty closely. And I do believe it's going to be very distinct from recent ones, including Trump's own last national security strategy, which bore no relation to what he actually personally thought.
Yeah, no, very good. So the most boring document that comes out of the U.S. government, the National Security Strategy, is going to be the pointer for us to figure out what to do. I actually think that's right. I remember the national security strategy coming out of after 9/11, which was a major sort of restatement of American thinking. I think you're going to get exactly the same thing, and you're right. Unlike the previous time when McMaster's and others wrote a strategy that have no bearing on what Donald Trump think, there's no way this administration will write a strategy that does not reflect Donald Trump's thinking, or at least something he's comfortable with. So
well,
I think that's
what he's thinking now.
Yeah, no, today, yeah, at the moment that it's printed, right? I think that's right. Hey, fascinating discussion. Nahal, Toosi of Politico, Prashant Rao of Semaphore, two great publications, by the way. Thanks so much for your insight. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another edition of World Review. And until then, have a fantastic weekend. For those in the United States, have a fantastic long weekend. Take care. We'll be back. Thanks so much.
Bye.